For centuries, sacred rituals echoed from cathedrals in the West to grand basilicas in the East, bound by scripture yet shaped by culture. Two worlds of faith coexisted. Uneasily. Behind closed doors, tensions stirred, questions of power, language, and authority that no council could fully settle. And then, one summer day, the silence broke. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. If history is your thing, or you simply enjoy learning new topics, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to continue creating captivating, impactful historical content. In this video, we will discuss the Great Schism of 1054, the formal split between Eastern and Western Christianity. The Great Schism, also known as the East-West Schism, marked a defining break in Christianity, one that ultimately solidified into the separation between the Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic churches. While the official split is traditionally dated to the year 1054, with mutual excommunications between a papal delegation in Rome and the Patriarch in Constantinople, the divide had been centuries in the making. Long before that dramatic moment, the two sides had been drifting apart across theological, political, and cultural lines. Differences in liturgy, language, and leadership authority gradually deepened the divide, creating two distinct visions for what the Christian faith should be. But this wasn't a unique development. In some ways, Christianity itself emerged from a schism, breaking away from Judaism in the first century as Jesus' followers formed their own identity. And internal divisions would continue to shape the faith from its early days. Movements like Arianism, which challenged the divinity of Christ, and Gnosticism, which emphasized secret knowledge and dualism, once flourished across the Roman world. Though these sects would eventually fade from practice, they were serious and widespread enough to be labeled heresies by the mainstream church. Even the tension between Western and Eastern churches was nothing new. Earlier ruptures, like the Acacian Schism in the 5th century and the Photian Schism in the 9th, had already formally, if temporarily, fractured the unity between Rome and Constantinople, and religious disagreements stemmed back even further. As early as the 160s, the two sides clashed during the Quartodeciman controversy, a dispute over the Easter celebration. One side favored marking the holiday on the 14th day of Nisan, aligning with the Jewish Passover, while the other insisted it should always fall on a Sunday, the day of Christ's resurrection. This seemingly narrow disagreement hinted at a deeper truth, that even in the Church's earliest centuries, the East and the West were moving in different directions. While earlier disagreements had strained the unity between East and West, additional fractures in doctrine and practice continued to deepen the divide. One of the earliest and most controversial developments was the addition of the Filioque clause to the Nicene Creed by some Western churches. Originally formulated in the 4th century, the creed stated that the Holy Spirit proceeds, quote, from the Father, end quote. But beginning in the late 6th century and gaining traction in the Latin Church by the 9th and 10th centuries, a phrase was added, declaring that it proceeds, quote, from the Father and the Son, end quote. Western theologians would later argue that this was a semantic issue, stemming from translation differences between Greek and Latin. But to the Eastern Church, this was no minor edit. Theologically, it appeared to alter the very nature of the Trinity. Many in the East viewed it as a violation of Canon 7 of the Third Ecumenical Council, held in Ephesus in 431, which forbade any changes to the creed. As St. Cyril of Alexandria emphasized, not even a single word should be added or removed. Other seemingly small liturgical differences also festered into much deeper rifts. The Eucharist, the sacred rite of consuming bread and wine in remembrance of Jesus' Last Supper, was celebrated using leavened bread in the East, symbolizing the risen Christ, but unleavened bread in the West, reflecting the Jewish Passover context of the Last Supper. While primarily a ritual difference, it became a symbol of cultural and theological divergence, especially when tensions reached a boiling point in the 11th century. Clerical celibacy was another flashpoint. In the Eastern Church, married men could become priests, though bishops were chosen from among celibate monastics. The Western Church, however, pushed for a celibate priesthood, with the movement gaining formal momentum by the 11th century and culminating in the Lateran Council of 1123, mandating clerical celibacy. To the East, this seemed an unnecessary burden on clergy and one that diverged from early church practices. Perhaps the most fundamental disagreement, however, lay in questions of authority. The Eastern Church believed that all patriarchs, the leading bishops of major Christian centers, were spiritually equal, with the Bishop of Rome holding a special place of honor but not supremacy. To the West, by contrast, the Pope was the supreme authority over the entire Christian world. Despite these growing tensions and conflicting visions for what the church should be, the Eastern and Western branches of Christianity continued to recognize each other as part of the same spiritual body. While theological rifts between East and West deepened, the political landscape surrounding the churches was just as fractured. In the West, the Pope, who resided in the Italian Papal States, operated under the protection of the recently formed Holy Roman Empire. That name alone, Roman, was a provocation to the Byzantine Empire, which considered itself the only heir to Rome's legacy. The crowning of Charlemagne as Emperor of Rome in 800 and later Otto in 862 had already offended Constantinople, and relations between the two powers remained uneasy, swinging from fragile cooperation to petty diplomatic spats. Despite these tensions, both sides tried to maintain Christian unity, but calls for religious independence grew louder in the East. In 1053, Patriarch Michael Cerularius took a bold and inflammatory step. Citing, among other things, the Western Church's use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist, he ordered the closure of all Latin churches in Byzantine lands, declaring their practices contrary to true Christianity. This sparked a swift retaliation from Pope Leo IX, who responded in kind, imposing similar restrictions on Eastern churches within Italy. Hoping to salvage the relationship, or at least negotiate terms, Pope Leo IX dispatched a delegation to Constantinople in 1054. Led by Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida, the legates carried two purposes: to request Byzantine support against the Normans who threatened them from southern Italy, and to address the growing rifts. But Cerularius refused to receive the legates, fanning the flames at a time when unity was already on life support. Further complicating matters at this fragile time was the geopolitical state of the Church. Christianity was led by 5 primary patriarchs, known as the Pentarchy: Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem. But with the latter 3 under Muslim control, authority increasingly concentrated in the hands of the only 2 remaining centers of Christian power, Rome and Constantinople, with neither willing to yield. Then, in April 1054, Pope Leo died, and on July 16th, with no papal authority, Cardinal Humbert entered the Hagia Sophia during the Divine Liturgy and placed a bull of excommunication on the altar, declaring Patriarch Cerularius and the Church of Constantinople to be outside the communion of the Catholic Church. The Eastern Church responded with a counter-excommunication against the delegation and the Western Church, and the Church would be fractured to this day. In the immediate aftermath of the dual excommunications of 1054, life for the average Christian, whether in the Latin West or Greek East, likely remained unchanged. The dramatic clash between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael Cerularius was, at least initially, a dispute confined to the upper echelons of the church hierarchy. Local communities continued their worship, monks followed their established rituals, and for many, this felt less like a world-altering event and more like just another episode of distant bickering among powerful clerics. After all, disagreements across the East and West had occurred before, with no permanent separation. From the Roman perspective, the Eastern Church was viewed as being in schism, not heresy. And that distinction mattered. Schism indicates a refusal to recognize papal authority, while heresy refers to a fundamental error in doctrine. Despite tensions, both sides still recognize the other as Christian, albeit flawed in their governance. The theological divergence was real, but not yet considered irreconcilable, with room, at least in theory, for eventual reconciliation. In the decades after the schism, both churches faced significant challenges. In the Latin West, the church was preoccupied with reform, notably the Gregorian reforms, which sought to eliminate corruption and assert papal authority, and soon after, the investiture controversy, a fierce power struggle between the Pope and secular rulers over who had the right to appoint bishops. The Byzantine East found its military threatened by Muslim forces. This reached a crisis point after a devastating defeat to the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. In desperation, the Byzantines turned to the very people they had recently excommunicated, their Latin Christian counterparts, requesting help. This appeal would eventually spark the First Crusade, a remarkable moment of East-West cooperation despite theological estrangement. This period reveals a more complex post-schism reality than one of outright animosity. While disagreement and mistrust had undeniably set the two churches on separate paths, the relationship was not fully severed. The East-West division would gradually deepen over the coming centuries, but in the near term, the communion remained strained but not broken. In this light, the Great Schism may have served more as a defining milestone than a clean break. The East-West schism would grow more definitive over time. Though 1054 marked a formal break, the real separation settled in gradually, solidified by centuries of growing theological, political, and cultural differences. The divide would take a dramatic turn in 1204, when Western Crusaders sacked Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, a moment that shattered any illusion of brotherhood between the churches, leaving a deep bitterness in the Orthodox world. However, as the Byzantine Empire declined, so did its influence over Orthodox Christianity. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the center of Eastern Orthodoxy found a new torchbearer. The Russian Orthodox Church, already deeply connected to the faith, would assume the mantle of spiritual leadership in the East. Moscow would dub themselves as the Third Rome and guardian of Christianity. This shift eased tensions, as Rome had been far more entangled with the Byzantines than with the rising Russian power. However, it also cemented the division. Unlike Byzantium, which shared centuries of direct engagement with Rome, Russian faith was born into the Eastern tradition, rather than splintering from the West, and the divide between the churches was no longer a wound, but rather a structural reality. This separation, initially political and cultural, would eventually become doctrinal. Theologies that had once diverged subtly now became more entrenched. Western Christianity, through councils and papal declarations, embraced developments like papal infallibility, defined in 1870, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, dogmatized in 1854, and the concept of purgatory as a distinct, temporary state of purification, teachings the Orthodox Church never adopted. Even the understanding of original sin began to differ significantly, with the West emphasizing inherited guilt, while the East focused more on inherited mortality and corruption. These theological divergences, once points of debate, became symbols of two increasingly distinct Christian worlds. Despite these separations, neither the Catholic nor the Orthodox churches ever fully denied the other's Christianity. Unlike the intense, often brutal and widespread wars of religion that ravaged Western Europe in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, the East-West relationship was characterized more by theological and cultural estrangement, punctuated by occasional violent clashes, like the sack of Constantinople. And in recent decades, efforts at reconciliation have gained momentum. The mutual excommunications of 1054 were formally lifted in 1965, and leaders from both traditions have continued to meet, pray, and work together in pursuit of unity, not by erasing differences, but by finding commonalities. The Great Schism stands as a turning point in church and world history, a moment when language, politics, theology, and geography pulled a once unified Christian world in two. Yet it also serves as a powerful reminder that bonds of faith, once formed, are hard to fully break. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.